Perhaps the defining characteristic of our species is our keen awareness of the dimension of time. We know the future is coming, and so we try to prepare for it. But we also know that we got here from the past. So we want to understand what happened to make sense of today. Now, if you're patient, it's easy to get to the future. It's just a matter of time. But reaching the past is a bit more difficult. Before the invention of writing, before archaeology, the only way we could access the past was through stories, tales passed down generation by generation. But the tricky thing is, stories are rarely told in the same way twice, and each iteration introduces small changes or big effects for entertainment. So by the time we hear of an event centuries removed from it, it may look nothing like what actually happened. So how do we know what's real in a story and what's not? Scholars have long been aware of these problems and so have regarded myth and legends with a lot of skepticism. Consider, for example, Troy. For a long time, people thought the city was the stuff of legends, like Wakanda. But that's until archaeologists discovered it in what is today Turkey. Other places like Atlantis, though, seem to be purely the product of our imagination. I want to tell you a legend, or about a legend, from ancient Arabia, about a lost tribe called Ad and their magical city called Iram. These two groups, Ad and Iram, we first hear about them in the form of pre-Islamic Arabic poetry. These are oral tales that were passed down and sort of collected in the 9th century. They began perhaps being composed in the 6th. And in these poems, we hear about an ancient group of people called Ad who were very powerful, strong, but at the same time had disappeared and left no descendants. No one knew where they went. In the 7th century, in the Quran, Islam's primary holy book, the story is fleshed out a bit more. Ad were a great people, mighty, but also haughty and arrogant. They disobeyed God, and for this they were punished. And they and their city of Iram were covered by the sands. The only bit of geographic information that we get from the Quran is that they were somewhere called Al-Ahqaf, which means, quite literally, the sand dunes, and that doesn't help us very much in Arabia to find this group. But, well, considering these stories and these fragments, later medieval storytellers started to elaborate as they told the story of Ad over the centuries. Ad became a race of powerful giants that lived around the time of Noah, just after the Great Flood. Their city of Iram was a magical place that you could not perceive with your human senses. You needed a sorcerer, a magician to take you there. So it's no wonder that most modern scholars, until very recently, regarded Ad and Iram as fairy tales, an allegory for civilizational arrogance. Nevertheless, this hasn't stopped people from trying to find them. In fact, if you go onto Google and write Ad or Iram, you'll find pictures like these, allegedly of archaeologists digging up the remains of these great giants. Well, I don't have to tell you, this is Photoshop. And now with AI, you have even more convincing images. But early explorers in Arabia, in the 20th century, well, they traveled to South Arabia. This is where the story said that Ad was located, somewhere in the deserts of South Arabia. And they traveled looking for some remains of an ancient civilization, but all were mostly unsuccessful. Well, all were unsuccessful. Nicholas Clapp, a filmmaker and amateur archaeologist in the 90s, launched an expedition to find the lost city of Ad. And this took him to South Arabia, to a site called Shisr. You see the ruins here. Well, having arrived at these ruins, he declared that he had found their lost city. But there was nothing really there to connect them to Ad, and the scholarly community remained unconvinced. Ad was still just a legend, and Iram a fairy tale. But an overlooked body of evidence exists. But we have to go to the other side of Arabia, to southern Jordan. And here you see a picture of a place called Wadi Ram. This is Jabal Ram, or otherwise the mountain of Ram. And there are a number of inscriptions from this area that tell us the ancient name of the site, but I want to share with you a very special one. This text here is a graffito carved maybe 1,700 years ago. by someone passing through, resting in the shade, and just deciding to write their name and a bit of, well, useless information for him. But I'm sure he had no idea the importance of that his small little text would have for future historians and archaeologists. His inscription reads like this. Well, weathering has eliminated his first name, so unfortunately we don't know exactly who he is, but he's the son of a man called Ali. And then he tells us that he wrote this text, the writing of his hand, at Iram. That's right. This area in southern Jordan in ancient times, almost 2,000 years ago, was called Iram. There are a number of inscriptions that confirm this, but there's no city around, in fact. There doesn't seem to have been a great magical city in this place, but rather it was just the name of the region. And if you paid attention to the modern name, you can see it actually was surviving in plain sight. The modern region is called Wadi Ram. We just lost the first syllable. I'm an epigraphist. When I'm not in the classroom, I like to spend my free time in the deserts of Jordan and Saudi Arabia, surveying, trying to find and document ancient inscriptions and archaeological sites, decipher them, and interpret them. My work in northern Jordan on the Syrian border in the Black Desert, which you see here, brought me and my team to this text. Again, not very impressive to the uninitiated, but the inscription gave me goosebumps. It is by a man called Masik, son of Zamhar. And in it, he writes that he's grieving for his father and his brother who are of the people of Ad. That's right, we come face to face with a text produced by someone from this lost tribe. But is this the same Ad? Is this the Ad we're looking for? And that Iram, well, there was no city there. Is that the Iram that Ad was at? Lots of questions. They're both generally in the same place, but they're not recognizable from the stories. Let's go back to Jabal Ram. At the base of that mountain, you see the remains of a temple. Again, to the untrained eye, not so impressive. Renovation work was done, and in that process, a stone was uncovered. And this is what the stone looks like. It's a small text that commemorates the building of the temple. And it says, by Ghawth, son of Aus Allah, son of Thakam, and he built the temple of Allat. And Allat is an ancient Arabian goddess, very well known and worshipped across the peninsula. And he is of the people of Ad. Indeed, we have Ad now, this tribe, this lost tribe, in Iram. They occur together. And we can date this material. It's about 2,000 years old. So let's go back to our myth of Ad. We began with or we ended up with, maybe if we think about how the story evolved, a race of giants that lived close to the time of Noah. But in reality, Ad was an Arabian tribe, rather minor, that lived about 2,000 years ago in Jordan, southern Jordan, maybe migrating up to northern Syria. They were supposed to inhabit a magical city beyond our senses. Well, maybe that part is right because we couldn't see any city here. But there's no trace of a great city like this in Wadi Ram. In fact, we have just a small temple. And judging by the size of the temple and the inscriptions, the people of Ad seem to be about the same size as us. So we can see how a story about an ancient tribe being passed down over the generations transformed them into mythology. And we can see how fields like archaeology and history can transform that mythology back into history. Thank you very much.